But there was a gate there at one time, a number of years ago, and, but I guess the traffic issue was a problem. But anyway, thanks to both of you all for the work.
Yeah, I just have a couple of comments. Well, first of all, I'd also like to congratulate you. This has been going on for a long time, and I know it's a big plus. But I don't like 10-year agreements, just in general.
This is not a 10-year. This is, if you read the wording carefully, you'll find out it's a 2-year agreement.
Oh, do you?
I'm not sure that they noticed that.
Okay, I thought I read.
Press is here, so they.
I thought I read it was good for 10 years.
It is from the commencement of the original agreement, which was May of 2004.
Oh, okay, all right. And the second thing is that somehow I think there should be some termination provision clauses in here. Just in general, it's always a good idea. I mean, we had a problem with the last agreement because at one point we didn't think there was any way to get out of it, and it wasn't going to be finished till next year, 2013. So somewhere in there, there's, I think, somehow just to protect ourselves, there should be some form of termination clause, just in case we ever need it, which I hope we never do.
I think that's why the 2-year window for this agreement was to not put us in any worse position than you already were, but right. Something in the future.
Yeah, what we tried to do is keep the original agreement as close to what it was originally, so that we didn't have to move too much. And you're right, that, to terminate this, there'd basically have to be a material breach, and that's pretty. There's not much to do in order to generate that.
But I think it's good work, right?
Right, and if we do another agreement, then I think that's where we'll try to pick up some of these loose ends as well.
So, actually, any public comments?
Yes. Bob McLean, and I'm a resident on Prior Lane, and haven't been aware of this discussion, but 2 comments. One is that I applaud whoever looks at safety issues around Encinal School. We have people parking all along Middlefield, blocking access and egress from Prior during the rush hour, so you can't see around the cars. So they come right up to the corner. They parade their kids back and forth across the roads. So I think there's a huge safety issue in general. The comment about Encinal is that for those of us who live in this little cul-de-sac, I'd probably go down Encinal 3, 4, 5 times a day. About 90% of the time there are no kids there. It's, I don't speed, but to have to put up with road bumps and in Mexico we call them topas, and just the wear and tear on the car, all the nonsense that goes along with that for a 10% problem that has a speed limit, and presumably if they have officers out there helping the women get in and out, typically women get in and out of the school and they're lined up forever and passing the car to get around so you can get home has been an issue where police have arrested people and all that kind of thing. So I think there's a much bigger issue than a speed bump. But I think the problem with the speed bump is that it's operable 24 hours a day, and we have kids there a few hours a day. So as a person who uses that a lot and knows it quite well, I'd ask us not to find a fancy term to put speed bumps in, particularly since some of the Atherton residents who are my neighbors think it's not warranted.
Well, I don't think we were saying we were going to use a fancy term and then say this slide. I said that we weren't sure that the majority of the people on Encinal that were Atherton residents were not interested in speed bumps, and so that we would be willing to look at other traffic calming devices. So there are several of them. Speed bumps is just the one.
I'm all for traffic calming. I'm not sure about devices.
Okay.
Yeah. The Transportation Committee constantly looks at the safety issues around the school, and particularly around Encinal. For example, one of the issues right now is to extend that left turn lane going on to Middlefield, and so we're looking into that. So we have through traffic going, continuing, so people aren't crossing the street and getting in the way, and children getting hurt. And so that's something that we are often aware of, and we speak with the principal, and we try and speak with the homeowners, as you may be aware, when there was a parking issue along Middlefield, to try and make sure everybody's in agreement as to the solution.
Well, as a homeowner, we haven't been spoken to, so thank you.
All right, so I'd like to make a motion that we accept the agreement, but we amend the letter to take out the word speed bumps and say traffic calming methodologies.
Second.
Can I have a vote? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes, and I hope. All right, we move on. Thank you for your input. And thank you for your work, Paul and Jerry. Okay, next, one of the items that we've all been waiting for is discussion of item number 22, adoption of the mid-year budget. So, Becca?
Thank you, Mayor, and members of the City Council. This evening, we're presenting to you a resolution requesting you to make some amendments to the annual adopted budget for the general fund. Each year, of course, the council adopts a budget in June for the next fiscal year, and there's a practice at the town of Atherton and most public agencies to go through a mid-year review process. Typically, that's done here in February, so I thank you very much for one extra month to make sure I've had time to analyze our financial situation. So this mid-year review is very revenue-driven this time, which I'm happy to say. Reviewing the revenues that were received through February, we have found that there are several areas where we can make adjustments increasing the projected revenue. I can go through the details of that, but I just want to kind of highlight some of the large parts of the report first. And then there are a few areas where we're requesting amendments to the appropriations budget, increased expenditures. The result of the net of the adjustments will increase the projected fund balance or the budgeted fund balance for the general fund, so that's good news. If you look at the report, right behind the resolution, Exhibit A provides the detail of the revenue breakdown that I can walk you through. And then on page 8 of 10, or the third page of Exhibit A, shows a summary of the departmental expenditures. Exhibit B provides you with the details of the changes to expenditures, kind of the reason behind what we're recommending. And then lastly, I'll go through and we can discuss the building department finances. And then I'll answer questions. So to start with revenue, property tax, of course, is one of the largest areas of our general fund revenue budget. The only area I'm really recommending is the section that's related to ERAF, or the Educational Relief Augmentation Fund, the money that the state plays around with from time to time. There's a statute that tells the county how they're going to provide excess ERAF back to the cities, right? They took a lot of money away, now they have a calculation where they give some of it back. And so in the past, we've received around $600,000, that's what was budgeted, but this year we got, so far to date, our amount is $718,000, so we're proposing an adjustment to that revenue line item. This is a revenue area that will likely, it's something that we need to watch, because there is a possibility that type of revenue will disappear in this county in the next couple of years. Your question?
What drives this number?
It has to do with the major calculation that also has to do with the ABA calculation and the Prop 92 calculation, but there is the more recent statute, and I'd have to get back to you on that the county is really using to calculate it. It has to do with the amounts that are required to go to the school districts and the other special districts, and then there's a pot of money that can be left over that's supposed to pay now the motor vehicle in lieu portion, and whatever's left of that can be allocated. So when I come back with the budget, I can give a more detailed calculation of what that is. But anyways, we've received that amount to date, and that's the amount that we'll get for this year.
And that's all that we'll get? That's all
that we'll get this year, we don't want payment. In the area of sales tax, since we don't have commercial or retail businesses here, the sales tax can be a little bit haphazard, and so we receive some minimal sales tax through probably mostly home-based businesses, and then we also receive use tax, which is sometimes one-time purchases that different residents submit their use tax for. And this year we got so far a pretty significant use tax payment that jumped our sales and use tax up, so I'm proposing a $55,000 increase to that revenue source this year. In the area of franchise taxes, the water rates were likely increased recently, and so our franchise revenue for Cal Water has increased. They make an annual payment. So far to date, we've received $105,000, so I'm recommending increasing the budget there. And then also our solid waste franchise agreement, there was an increase in rates this year, and so we're projecting that we will receive $80,000 more in that area as well. In the development area, the planning department, it looks like activities maybe are a little below average. That doesn't mean that it won't pick up, but I'm just proposing reducing that revenue source slightly by $30,000. And in the building department, we've seen a lot of increased development activity, and so we've projected an increase in the revenue in that area.
Question on the planning. I think that there was going to be kind of a change in culture that was expected to take place as far as what we could charge for and what we wouldn't charge for. Has anything changed since we had the discussion at the beginning of the budget period to account for this?
No, I'm not aware of any changes to fees. It's just items have been pretty slow that go up to the planning commission level. So we're just not seeing.
We're charging everything we can, though.
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Last year, by February in the area of planning, we had received $116,000, and this year we've received $87,000. So there's a slight decrease in activity there.
I do have a point to make about the building department fees. If you remember, what is it now, 2 years ago, we were going to revisit those fees on a periodic basis, and it was certainly more frequently than, I think it was the first time it was going to be 6 months and then every year thereafter. And we have not been good about that. We have not looked at them really except on 1 or 2 fees at all. So I think we need to do that, particularly since, if you remember last year, what was it? We used up 50% of the reserve that we had, and we anticipated that we could end up using all of the reserve. Now, I realize we're in a different scenario right now with the outsourcing, but what that tells me, and what told us then, that we had to start looking at those fees again, because we were basically subsidizing some of them, and we were going to run out of money. So that may no longer be the case, given our restructuring, but we did make a commitment to review those fees, and I think that that's something that we've been negligent about and should do.
We've actually received 5 proposals for a master fee schedule revision, so we'll shortly we'll review those.
So I just want to make one follow-up comment to what Councilmember McKeithen was saying about the building department reserves. I think one of the reasons that from our former cost allocation study, the NBS study revealed that the building department had almost $1 million in reserves, and that was way too much. And she was recommending that in downtime, when the cycle did hit a low revenue period, that some of those reserves would be used, and she did recommend that we reduce those reserves by at least 50%, which we did, but to keep 50%. And so I think that that's really where we are now, except I think we've actually got a little bit more reserves from the building department, about $600,000, if I look at this right. Anyway, so I think that we're on track. I think we're in pretty good shape there. I think with the restructuring that we've done and the upturn in the economy, I know there's lots more building activity.
So while we're on the building department revenue, I know we asked this question during the finance committee meeting, but I don't know if you had a chance to research it, but there were a number of unclaimed refunds that previous interim building department head Dennis Locker was looking at, and we were running through a series of timings and notifications, and then as the statutes allowed us, then sweeping those in, we had recaptured and put to our general fund over 6 figures worth of fees. and there was substantial more that was there. And can we get a comment on whether or not there's any of that that's available, and whether or not we have a program in place to continue to do that, so that every 6 months we reallocate those that we're actually allowed to, because they've never been claimed and people don't respond to the ads.
She
I was involved in that program,
Yeah.
and essentially, the program itself had a limiting timeline, and when we went out, we actually extended it and did everything we could but go knock on doors. And I think a lot of people had already moved on. A lot of developers put that fee into their estimated profit, and if they get the profit, then they just move on. And the prior building official, the prior finance director, and we met and we went through the last phase of that program. We exercised the last few timelines, and we turned that money over to the general fund, but specifically noting that if somebody came up with a really good excuse, I was in Antarctica on an expedition and I just got back, and so I have a good excuse for, I was in a coma, then we certainly would have enough funds available to look at, a good cause refund. But for the most part, the money has been turned over.
Because I somehow I had the impression that there was still $90,000 to $100,000, but I may have been wrong.
The money may still be there, but it was just because of this. It's not there for anybody to come and take. It's there because out of an overabundance of caution, making sure everybody has filed their claims, and we still do get a couple of claims dribbling in from different pots. And as those have been coming in, we've been looking at them on a case-by-case basis and handling them individually. But I think most of that is now pretty much done.
So where would that be located on this chart, revenue? Would that be, is cheated unclaimed property line? No, that's different.
There is no current revenue associated with that. If there was any balance remaining, it's likely included in the reserve fund balance amount for this year.
Hi, Deborah. Looks like we've got some good stuff here. But I just want, at the Finance Committee meeting, we asked if you would talk to the assessor again to see how our property taxes are calculated. And you were going to make an appointment to see him. I just wondered, first of all, have you done that yet?
I have not made an appointment yet.
And just for public information, Atherton contributes over $60 million in property taxes to San Mateo County. In return, we get about $6 million. In fact, we get less than 10%. And we want to know exactly how everything is calculated, because if you look at your tax bill, if you live in San Mateo County, you will find it says that they return 17.3% property taxes to the cities. Well, 17.3% of 60 million is a lot more than we get. So we are trying to make sure that whatever calculation was made, that in fact it was done properly, and Deborah has been trying somewhat unsuccessfully to find time or to have one of the assessors talk to her. I personally also asked him if he would show me how he calculated it, and he gave me a sort of general answer, including why don't you look at the website and you'll find out. That was not the answer that we wanted, and Deborah, I'm sure, is going to pursue it diligently.
That was the deputy controller, and I will.
The other comment I would make is that based on the Finance Committee, it still looks as if the town at the end of the year could possibly be losing about $300,000 on what I call a P&L basis. That's substantially better than last year, where we were losing about $1 million, so we've made some improvements, but we're still not out of the woods yet. And I think that it's important that we all recognize that despite everything that's coming in, we still have work to do to make sure that the number is zero or positive at the end of the year.
in that light, we asked a couple of meetings ago about this, or I asked that we have on an agenda of the post office. And if you see, the post office is projected to bring in $7,500 of income. The cost when Eileen Wilkerson did her report a couple of years ago was more than $40,000 to the town. And it served about 9, I think it was, Atherton residents a day, and just about the same number of Menlo Park residents, and never more except on tax day or Christmas. So I think we really need to look at the post office. I'm not saying we're going to discontinue it, but I think given the fact it is bringing in so little income now that we have reassessed how we're getting income based upon the sale of stamps, basically, and not a lump sum payment, we are losing even greater amounts of money, and considering our staff is limited, that also means a pretty big use of staff for that purpose that's being subsidized. So I would repeat again, I'd like to see it as an agenda item where we could have an updated report, the Eileen Wilkinson report, and also some new figures for us to consider.
We've already begun that research, and we started counting how many Atherton residents actually come in per day since you made that request.
Thank you.
So one last question I have, I know that you're still on the revenue. You know, I've seen a lot of reports that say we've been issuing a lot of traffic citations, and in fact it's up, you know, hundreds of percent since the Transportation Committee and our chief.
Not hundreds. Don't say that.
Hundreds of percent.
In
But
certain
anyway.
months, a couple of months, it was up quite a bit,
All right.
but not hundreds.
So, I just want to make sure that if we're bringing in additional revenue, we're not saying we're going to come in on budget, but that we're actually doing a trend analysis, and we're showing all the areas of where revenue potentially could come in. I realize in some cases, such as the tax rolls, it's pretty much set and we're not going to get anything. But where we think that there's going to be additional revenue, we're showing the proper trends, that we have that visibility so that we can actually make our best efforts to control the budget and come in on budget or below budget where we thought we'd be, as Councilmember Dobby has already pointed out.
On that one, you have to be really careful, because increase in citation doesn't bring in a
No,
lot
I
of money to
understand.
the town.
But it
And
brings
to the
in some.
extent we have increased citations, we have increased enforcement, which has a cost to it, and also if anyone challenges it, they have to go, or even if they don't, if they think they're gonna, they have to go to court. So the cost could outweigh the increased income.
Not debating, just saying. You're right.
Thank you, council members.
Okay.
Councilmember Dobby was correct to say that a lot of this increase in revenue is one-time revenue, which is offsetting our kind of our ongoing costs. So it is something we need to watch. There's a recommended total increase in the general fund revenues of about $570,000, which is offset by a proposed increase in expenditures of $491,000. The majority of the increase to expenditures has to do with the solid waste agreement that the town has. This item was brought to the council, I believe, in September of last year, and
October.
is it October?
And then
Okay.
we voted on it in November.
Thank you. Anyways, it required a true-up payment, and the council decided that the city would pick that up out of the general fund. And so for this fiscal year, it's $253,000, and there will be another $85,000 in next year's budget to cover that true-up payment. The other portion of the majority of the expenditures have to do with the building department, because our current agreement says that our contract building services are a percentage of revenue. So as revenue has increased, our contract expenditures also have increased slightly. And the other items are pretty small, and the details are listed here. I'm happy to answer any questions. So overall, we're not that far from the revised budget. We're about, $78,000 to the good. It increases your reserves that are set aside. The council has agreed to a policy of committing 15% for emergencies of their fund balance, and then another kind of 20% that would be there and that we wouldn't go below. So an increase in expenditures will also increase those fund balance reserves. So the last thing, we touched on the building department a little bit. Now, I took this model from a previous mid-year that had been presented to you for consistency purposes, and the last page of the staff report is attachment 2, and it's just kind of summarizing where the building department is. The amended revenue budget and the amended expenditure budget, also adding some cost allocation expenses, because the two departments don't allocate any costs for overhead or city manager oversight or city attorney services or anything like that. So there's an additional $15,000 towards city attorney services that's part of the budget, and 10% cost allocation overhead amount. So if you were to add that all up, it's just less than $300,000 of a decrease in the building department reserves, or you could call it a loss if you wanted to, but it's saying that you're going to be in the hole a little bit and you would draw on the reserves. Now, when the budget was presented in September, there was a projection of about $615,000 being in the reserve at the end of this year, and the projection as of today with those mid-year adjustments is $636,000. So we're just about on target. So it hasn't changed much from what the proposed budget was. As we go forward, it is going to change, because included in these expenditures are several one-time costs. There was a significant amount of salary cost that was one-time, including unemployment expense. There was some crossover or overlap in some of the professional services costs. And so the Public Works Director and I have identified that the cost should be lower in the next full 12-month period.
By approximately how much? Just a rough, I mean, is it 100,000?
At least $100,000. Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
So that concludes my report. I'm happy to answer any further questions.
So, Deborah, thank you very much. It was really well done, and I think that it's really important for everybody to understand what you just said, is that the building revenue versus expenses, that this was kind of a messy year, and there was overlap, there were double employment, the employees being paid for services rendered because of the restructuring of the department, and but going forward, those will even out, and we do expect to be on, if not totally break even, but have some reserves. And that while we're going to be using projectedly almost $300,000 of our building department reserves, that will still leave us with $636,000 in reserves. And that's from what we were told from NBS is a reasonable amount of reserves. Anything more than that is quite a lot for the building department. And I just want to make a note that in 2010, Lise Ho did a 5-year projection at the request of council, and the projected loss for 2011-2012 was $1.2 million in our general fund. And so I think we've made a lot of progress. Thank you very much, Mayor Dobby, and for council and all of our staff for working so hard and pulling it together.
Just a clarification, my recollection is that the use of the building department reserve, when we were discussing it with the company that was doing our fee adjustment analysis, the fact that it was claimed that we had too much in the building department reserves and should reduce it by approximately 15% was never, ever something that was suggested or recommended by the people doing the fee structure. It was something that was recommended by our former city attorney. And then the people who did the fee structure said that would be acceptable. But they did not suggest that we should reduce the building department reserve, and there were differences of opinion as to whether or not that should take place.
I'll let you have the last word on that.
I just would add a small point here that we are still paying unemployment insurance for the employees we laid off. And hopefully they'll all get a job very soon. or the unemployment, or when the unemployment insurance runs out, that will be another reduction in our expense item.
Jerry, any comments? For me, Deborah, thank you very much for your work here. I've been over the last number of years working on the finance, working with the finance committee and the audit committee, and the reports that have been coming through from the finance organization have been very, very complete, and we appreciate that very much. So it's good work for that. Thank you very much. Why don't we have public comments on item 22, which is the amended budget you just heard about. Any comments? Yes?
Denise Coleman, 74 Atherton Avenue. It's really just a question, and just really thank you for the report. The question was that there's a transfer from the special parcel tax fund, and my understanding of the special parcel tax that covers capital expenditures and safety, but I'm not seeing in the expenditures capital monies that were spent. So is this just the operating budget and not the capital portion of the town's budget?
That's correct.
Okay,
This
great.
is the
That
general
answers my
fund.
question. Thank you. Okay.
There's a different fund that holds the other part of the parcel tax.
Thanks.
Okay, so any other public comments? We'll come back to the council. Can we have a motion to?
Could I just ask one question? What we're dealing with here is a general fund, right?
Correct.
What about the special funds? Is there any need to look at adjustments there?
Staff's not recommending any adjustments to
Okay,
the special
thank you.
funds at this time.
I move acceptance.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. We move on to item number 23, which is a discussion on the town committees and commissions with rules and procedures. Teresa.
Thank you. You have my report. I just want to note that the report wasn't written to diminish any of our volunteers or residents. It's just strictly to review and analyze and figure out what we're going to do.
So your report, it talks in generalities and then goes through your items one by one.
Yeah, we might consider going through each committee one by one.
Before we do that, I'd like to say something. The revisions to the committee and commission rules and procedures is basically been triggered by a report and investigation of one committee in the town. And that was the instigating event. To the extent that that report, the investigative report, and the legal analysis have not been made public, I believe it's premature for us to be discussing amendments to the committees. And the reason for that is this. Without going into detail, first of all, I think we should make it public, both of those. There's nothing legal about the investigative report because it was done on a non-legal basis by our assistant city attorney, but it was done outside the retainer, and it stated that it was non-legal, so it doesn't have any attorney-client confidentiality in that respect. But also, this committee had asked that the investigation be pursued and a report back to us. This item on the agenda, item 23, does not report back what the findings are. Instead, it really essentially goes and talks about what changes should be made. I think the community needs to understand what the issues were. I think the community needs to read those documents, have a chance to digest them, a chance to analyze them, a chance to ask questions about them. I can tell you when and if those reports are made non-privileged, what the issues, or some of them were, and where the pitfalls were that might be applicable not only to that committee, but any committee in town, because we're not singling out that committee for issues. However, I would much prefer that the people of the town have an opportunity to look at those documents before that takes place. You should be entitled to your own investigation of that. You were promised that you would be able to hear what our report was, and to the extent that there are indications that there were some failings on behalf of staff and maybe council and who knows who else in those documents, I think it would be a continuation of bad past practices for this council not to say that we would like the public to be aware of what happened in order to avoid those problems in the future. They are serious problems. And so that is why I would like first to make a motion that the investigative report, and although it doesn't say anywhere on the investigative report, it was prepared by Jennifer Larson, our assistant city attorney, be made public, as well as the report that was prepared by our city attorney based on that investigation entitled Recommendations Regarding the EPC Committee. And at that point, I would like to ask that we discontinue or set aside this issue for the time being until those are made public, and then come back and discuss whatever questions might have arisen as a consequence of those documents, as well as what we'd like to see done with the committee structures here in town and ways to avoid those sort of issues with our committees. And I say committees, not committee. So I would first like to make a motion that those two documents be no longer confidential and be made available to the public for consideration.
I'll second.
Do we want to have any discussion on this, please? And then hear from council in regards to the motion.
Mr. Mayor, I have no problem with that concept whatsoever. The only reason it came back the way it did is because the council asked for it, not the public. And it came back to the council because that's who asked me to prepare an analysis. The report came because the city manager